Hello everyone and welcome to a very breezy Hampshire. I'm at Middle Wallop today, the home of the UK's Army Air Corps and the Army Flying Museum. Yes, Scott is going to go and see some helicopters. I'm going to educate myself a little bit about helicopters and perhaps have a nice day as well. Join me on my layover.
One life for the revolution. Rise up and unite. Woo! Rise up. Rise up and
When I think of Army aviation, my brain always turns to those nasty helicopter things and providing support for the Army in the field. But this museum here covers the 5 periods of the history of the Army Air Corps. It starts back in 1872 with balloons and Samuel Cody, who invented a number of balloons for the Army Air Corps, but he also took them as a pioneer into the first fixed-wing aeroplane which he designed for the Army, cunningly called Army Aeroplane 01. When we go back to the early days of Army flying, the people who crewed the balloons and the aircraft were in fact Royal Engineers and nothing to do with the Army Air Corps as we see it today. Indeed, back in 1912, when they became the Royal Flying Corps and specialised in flying single-engine piston aircraft like this Scout Pup behind me, they used to fly around at about 97 knots, directing artillery. Now, by directing that artillery, they were actually putting themselves in danger because very often they didn't get back because enemy action took them out. It was their own guns shooting at them and shells falling and knocking the aircraft out of the sky.
Hang on. What about the months of training?
Hey, wet pants! This isn't the Women's Auxiliary Balloon Corps. You're in the 20-minuters now.
Sir?
Yes,
sir.
Pratt at the back.
I think we'd all be intrigued to know why you called the 20-minuters.
Oh, Mr. Thicker, imagine not knowing that.
Well, it's simple. The average life expectancy for a new pilot is 20 minutes.
Ah.
Life expectancy of 20 minutes.
That's right.
The 20-minuters didn't last that long, and that's not a pun on the 20 minutes. What actually happened in 1918 was the government realised that the air warfare domain was going to become more and more important. So therefore they established on the 1st of April 1918 the Royal Air Force to take command of all things aviation. Did the formation of the Royal Air Force mean the end for the Army Air Corps? Well, sadly, no. The Army Air Corps managed to keep a hold of some aircraft, and in cooperation with the Air Force they formed a number of squadrons flying Osters like you see behind me, and these were called RAF Army Cooperation or AC squadrons. These squadrons had used these aircraft in multi-roles such as artillery spotters, ground attack and reconnaissance, but again these squadrons saw heavy losses with these aircraft, not from enemy action, but again from their own fire. These aircraft were getting so low, so close to the action with the forward air controllers that in fact they were getting blown up by our own artillery shells. It's 1940 and the Army have decided that it's time to move away from fixed wing support on the battlefield and move towards something a little bit different. In this case, the Theskeeter. This is the first helicopter to enter Army service in the United Kingdom. This aircraft is the Theskeeter Mark II, and it was an amazing aircraft. In fact, huge safety record. Well, maybe not. Actually, this aircraft used to, the Mark II version, would actually shake itself to bits in ground resonance quite regularly. The engine would get so hot that the exhaust would melt and fall off of the aircraft. And quite uniquely for some of these earlier aircraft, the blades were not made of wood, solid wood. They were actually made of framed wood with canvas and doping over them, as you would probably see on aircraft like the Oster or the Piper Cub. And this would regularly, at high speed, come off, leading to a loss of lift. Sounds like fun. Not. Now here is something you definitely wouldn't see me doing normally. I'm sitting in a helicopter. Thankfully this one hasn't flown for some time. This is a Westland Scout and was in service with the Army Air Corps from the 60s through to the late 90s. This aircraft was a workhorse, but what it's doing here in the museum is allowing me to come in and demonstrate how helicopters fly. Now, please, I am not a helicopter pilot, so this is going to be very, very basic stuff. But essentially there are two controls, the joystick or cyclic, and down here on the left is a handle which essentially pulls up and down, which is known as the collective. In essence, the collective down here on the left, when you pull that up and down, it collectively moves all of the rotors together, so you will get more thrust. It's effectively a thrust lever, and the cyclic will individually tilt the rotor disc or the blades in a certain angle to allow you to move forward. So if I push it forward, the blades will tilt. If I pull it back, the blades will tilt in the other direction. And that's the same as if I want to go left or right. All seems a bit like tap your head, rub your tummy, black magic to me, but it works. When I think of helicopters in the Army Air Corps, I think of the Westland Lynx. This Lynx behind us is the AH-1 pre-production model, a very special Lynx because this actual aircraft broke the world speed record in 1972 for just a tad under 200 miles an hour for a helicopter, a record which still stands today. But what made the Lynx so special? Why is the Lynx so special? Well, let's just go and have a look at the rotors. So what's the difference between the Lynx and the Scout that we saw earlier? Well, actually the Lynx has something which they call a fixed rotor head, and this actually allows this helicopter to do a proper barrel roll, which you wouldn't be able to do in the Scout, which has the articulating head. Now, a fixed head, what that actually means is, if we look up into the head, is for the four blades from the core of the head outwards are actually solid, and it's only the outer part of the blade that actually moves. This allows it to be able to do that rolling maneuver for a barrel roll, and it allows it to fly much faster than perhaps a helicopter with the more conventional head. When we all think of helicopters, I'll challenge anyone not to think about MASH and the venerable Bell 47 that was made so famous by that program. But also the aircraft was made famous for its aeromedical evacuation role in that program. But aeromedical evacuation actually has its roots way, way, way back in 1917, when a BE-2C aircraft of the Royal Flying Corps actually evacuated an Imperial Camel Corps trooper from the Sinai Desert. Bit of a ride, I imagine. Beats a camel though. But camel jokes aside, the Bell 47 was an excellent helicopter for battlefield casualty evacuation. But the Army Air Corps has actually used a number of helicopters in this role and fixed-wing aircraft over time. They used to put a fixed-wing stretcher in the Beaver, and also the Alouette. Actually, many people don't think that the British Army Air Corps used the Alouette, the French aircraft, but they did. They used the Alouette in Kenya for battlefield evacuation training as part of the British Armed Forces in Kenya. Since the early days of Army aviation, they've realised that actually the most stable platform for battlefield reconnaissance or surveillance is a fixed-wing aircraft. And from the early days, from the Army Aeroplane 01 all the way through to until this year, the Army Air Corps has flown fixed-wing aircraft in a battlefield reconnaissance and surveillance role. Not unlike the Islander that you see behind me here. These were in operation in Northern Ireland up until very, very recently, just earlier this year, and I've flown this mark of aircraft. I just think the Islander looks great for the role, and it doesn't look like a helicopter. Beaver. Now this museum has some amazing exhibits, not all of which are fixed wing aircraft, I may add. This one here behind me is the Rotor Buggy. It's caught my eye. It's essentially a Jeep with a rotor on top of it. This was designed by a gentleman called Raoul Hafner, and the purpose of this rotor was it would be towed behind an airplane like a gyrocopter, and it would allow you to tow heavy pieces of machinery or outsized pieces of machinery like this Jeep behind us here onto the battlefield in an aerial way. This didn't last very long because guess what? Transport aircraft came along and made this redundant. But what a bonkers way to get to the battlefield, a rotor on top of your Jeep. I'm a big fan of drones, as everyone knows, but I knew that drones started way back in the early 1900s. But what I didn't know was the British Army had drones back in the 1970s. The drone behind me here was designed by Westland and is called the Wisp. Now the Wisp was able to send both digital and infrared pictures back to an operator station, which certainly looks like something it was run by valves. But this was innovative at the time. But the British Army decided not to go forward with it, and only 4 of these were ever made. They said drones don't really have a future on the battlefield. How wrong they were. Well, I've really enjoyed being at the Army Air Corps Museum today and learned an awful lot about helicopters, balloons, gliders, you name it, I've learned about it today. But what it has taught me, all of this education is actually nothing beats a fixed wing aircraft, and everyone loves a beaver.